What's up guys, Deroir here with the second part of my comprehensive review of Guild Wars 2 second expansion, Path of Fire. In this video, I want to talk about the new desert maps that were introduced with Path of Fire. The overall designs, the environment, the creature designs, and stuff like that. Now, the map design of the 5 desert maps introduced with Path of Fire can probably be best described as being some of the most detailed, beautiful, and well-structured maps that we've seen throughout the entire game's lifespan. So many subtle design decisions have been added to every map to make them feel distinct and diverse. With this, I'm referring specifically to areas where the atmosphere of the air, the skybox, and the lighting changes drastically to give you, the player, a feeling of being wholly in the scene. We see this in the Ellyn Riverlands where, as you enter the vast desert of the region, you are suddenly surrounded by a sandstorm which creates an instant feeling of being far from everything, stuck in the wild with no horizon in sight. Or in the desert Highlands where you see the heat shimmers in the air, or the fog that transitions your movement from the hot lowlands to the coolness of the mountain ridge. Now, through this section of my review, I won't be going over every detail about every map. I found that player satisfaction with maps, their design, and inherent event structure is on a very subjective scale. Some things that some players might find to be the be-all and end-all of quality of a map might not be the same for other players. As such, throughout this part of my review, I'm going to try my best to be very objective in my detailing of the different maps, while still spicing it up with my view on my favorite bits and pieces. Therefore, I'm going to point out some of my personal highlights from every map and showcase some of my favorite areas and creatures throughout. But before I do so, I have to point out one essential and extremely positive feature and change for the Path of Fire maps compared to the Heart of Thorns maps, the map-wide currency, or should I say expansion-wide currency at this point, because regardless of us getting 5 maps, every single one of the Path of Fire maps all share the same general currency, respectively called trade contracts and elegy mosaics. Much unlike Heart of Thorns, which had a separate currency for each individual map, a design decision which seems to have come from the intention to give players map-exclusive goals to work on, but then incidentally made a lot of people feel like they were just forced onto specific maps and into grindy meta event chains just to acquire the larger rewards requiring all the different currencies. Now seemingly there's none of that in Path of Fire, and I gotta say, regardless of me having grown used to the hot grind, this feels so liberating to me. I can literally pick and choose any of these beautifully stunning maps to play on, and I will be able to work towards any and all of the new rewards. However, as it has been pointed out numerous times since the launch of the expansion by the Guild Wars 2 community, unlike Heart of Thorns maps, the Path of Fire maps do not have any equally large and rewarding meta event chains inherent to them. Now, this might be a very subjectively bad thing, but objectively it isn't necessarily a bad aspect of Path of Fire. The lack of grandiose meta event chains also add to the feeling of player freedom, to not feel forced into partaking in specific boss encounters just to feel rewarded, and thus adds to an aspect of the expansion which Arena themselves, even pre-launch, very much emphasized, which is the feeling of exploration. With Path of Fire, we've been given 5 immensely large maps, but imagine if players felt obliged to only play on a tiny square patch in the corner of one of these maps to feel rewarded for their playtime. I, for one, feel a sense of liberation from the old event structures of Heart of Thorns, and I personally believe the decision to retain this feeling of freedom as being a wise design choice from Arena's side to shake up the general feeling that we've previously grown accustomed to. And regardless, it's not like there are no events or things to do in these maps. There are a lot of those. It's just that each event seemed to be equally rewarded. However, this whole topic of rewards in Path of Fire is something that I will be taking head on in a separate video later on, so we'll get back to that. All that said though, I don't believe that ArenaNet should stop, or even believe that they have any plans to stop making grand scale meta event chains, as these definitely also bring with them an awesome feeling of accomplishment and naturally inherent rewards with them. but diversity in map and event structures is, in my book, very much a huge positive. It very heavily distinguishes the Path of Fire as a separate entity from the things that we saw in Heart of Thorns maps. And that diversity is something that I immensely appreciate. As a side note to this whole topic, during the developer AMA on Reddit for Path of Fire, it was insinuated that they are looking to increase the rewards for some of the meta event chains, some of which was already done in the last big update, but personally, I don't feel like that was even close to being enough. My guess, however, is that perhaps ArenaNet might already have some larger events ready which will be released in these maps with the Season 4 release, which take the inspiration from and continues the story of the cliffhangers we were left with at the end of the main story to spice up now known areas with extra events, but that's just pure speculation really. While we're on the topic of map rewards, each of the Path of Fire maps have taken inspiration from the Season 3 of the Living Story and added daily repeatable heart vendors. Now, as annoying and tedious as I personally sometimes find heart completions to be, most of the Path of Fire heart vendors at least have the added bonus of giving you the opportunity to farm large amounts of karma in the area after you completed them by turning in extra tokens to them in exchange for karma. However, that's really it for the incentive to repeat them. As it stands, each heart vendor has a new mini that you can get. You can also buy recipes for some of the new armors, weapons, and foods, and quite a few of the new achievement collections also require vendor-specific items. Neither of these things are very expensive. Most are actually what I would consider extremely cheap, and so once you've gotten the most pressing things for yourself, you have zero reward incentive to repeat these hearts. As such, they just become a nuisance after a very short time, since the heart vendors so instantaneously just become artificially locked vendors for no good reason really. ArenaNet essentially chose to transfer the idea of repeatable hearts from the Living Story Season 3's success without really considering what actually made those hearts attractive for players to repeat. And so every single heart vendor in Path of Fire feels misplaced. But before I dive into the reward section of my review, which I will talk much more about in a video specifically dedicated to that topic, let's first talk about each map design, the events, and the creatures inhabiting it. The Crystal Oasis is the first map that we enter. Here we see the first major new civilization that we've encountered throughout Guild Wars 2 since launch. The Amnoon Oasis is a large city located in the open world filled with merchants, bounty boards, the deluxe edition of Path of Fire's VIP area, the Lily of the Ellyn, and of course a casino, because why not? This casino is also the host of this map's meta event, a coin gathering event in which all players get to run around and gather casino coins to cash in for rewards or consume for extra experience towards your mastery progression. If all 3 coin gathering events are completed, the meta results in a bonus event, a boss event, where players get the chance to beat a giant Choya Pinata before it escapes for a chance at large rewards. I personally found this meta event to be a very meditative and an almost nostalgic experience of getting to run around and collect coins, much like many of the old school games. For this event, challenge is not in the limelight, but rather it just feels like casual fun. Apart from gambling and piñatas, the Crystal Oasis is also host to a slew of awesome sites and locations, the most immediate of which are its humongous pyramids. There are also a Sephirite city, a throwback to the earlier Living World seasons, and the Temple of Cormyr, the human who became a god back in the original game, a character very much appreciated in this region of the world. Overall, the Crystal Oasis is a visual pleasure to run around. The only thing missing to me would perhaps be an intricate jumping puzzle inside one of these monumental pyramids, or just a puzzle in general, like the one we see in the second map, the Desert Highlands. But then again, jumping puzzles aren't really that frequent in Path of Fire, probably due to the introduction of mounts making most jumping puzzles just too easy unless you completely restrict the usage of mounts. Throughout the scenery, we're met with a lot of new creature designs. One of the two arguably most notable to mention is the Hydra, which are not only visually terrifying, they can also be quite tough to fight against, especially the legendary ones. Hydras can be found in pretty much every map, but the Crystal Desert is the first encounter most players will have. The second creature I want to mention is also my second favorite creature design of the entire expansion, and that is the Djinn. Now, both of these creatures are huge throwbacks to the Guild Wars 1 campaign, and so for a lot of players, myself included, they bring with them a whole slew of nostalgia with them. But the nostalgia aside, the Djinn have been made into excellent enemies, and that goes for all variants of the Djinn. Whether they be regular mobs or legendary, these guys pack a punch and are really fun to fight. Even the Djinn Slayer achievement is the first ever Slayer achievement to only require 100 kills instead of 1,000. My guess is that that's to compensate for their inherent difficulty. The Djinn, like the Hydra, are basically present in every map. Some of the Djinn in a few locations throughout the desert even has daily riddles for players as well that you can guess at for achievements or hero points. The Desert Highlands map is, like most of these new maps, host to a whole lot of Guild Wars 1 nostalgia locations. Here we most prominently find the ruinations of the lair of the former Dragon Champion and Prophet, Glint, the very location where Destiny's Edge stood side by side with Glint to combat Kralkatorrik, but lost. The crater of the lair marks the death of Glint. Further north, we find the Tomb of the Primeval Kings and a portal directly into the Mists and the Secret Library, which probably is one of my top 3 locations of the entire game, not just the expansion. The level of detail found in this humongous library is just astounding. To the west, we find one of the bottom-most located mountaintops coming down from the Shiver Peak mountain range. This mountain has been hollowed out by the dwarves centuries ago, only to be left to the beasts of the deep after the near extinction of the dwarven race. This mountain area itself is my absolute favorite area of the expansion. I love snowy areas, and I've long wanted a proper mountainous region, and this area, though small, definitely gave me a good sense of verticality, climbing up the mountains and looking down. The dwarven ruins of the mountain also host a large puzzle in which players have to find the dwarven runes to unlock the gates of their secrets and potentially find the pieces of the dwarven weapons to be able to craft them. This puzzle in particular really blew my mind the first time around. Not only does it have very stunning visuals all throughout, it also distinguishes itself very heavily from every other puzzle that we've ever seen in the game. In this map, we also find one of my favorite entities of the expansion, the legendary bounty target, the Djinn, Eleutheria's Wintergust. The fight against him can be a tough one indeed, as he darts around the ruins of the frozen structure. Now, if you defeat him, he will allow you to answer a daily riddle for the achievement called Riddle Me This. In the fog coming down from the mountain, you'll most likely encounter giants, and I for one am super happy that ArenaNet decided to add more giants to the open world, even though it's not hard to decipher why they've nearly gone extinct if this is their general behavior. In the lowlands of the map, we find a new variation of harpies that we've not seen before. Apart from their differing looks, they're also decked out with elite specialization skills from both dragon hunters and spellbreakers, which actually make these foes rather dangerous to fight against if you're not prepared. As we enter the third map, the Ellyn Riverlands, you will possibly be met immediately with the meta event chain of the map, an expedition to enter an extremely nostalgic location, Augury Rock, the place of ascension for the heroes of Guild Wars 1. During this chain of events, you follow an explorer to find and unlock one of the ancient teleporters of the lands, to teleport yourself into Augury Rock. Once inside, you'll be met by a branded Forgotten boss fight who periodically creates doppelgangers of all the players inside the rock to fight alongside it. If you manage to succeed and defeat it, you will be granted full access to the Augury Rock and the possibility of discovering all the lore from chapters of the Flameseeker prophecies written on the tablets inside. Or you can choose to follow the path of Turaiasa, the Vabian legend who struck down the Lich King Palawajoko. After a short while, however, Augury Rock will close back up again. tossing out wild magic around the entire area. If you manage to gather all the wild magic, a legendary doppelganger will spawn to hunt down players. Now, as cool and nostalgic as this event is, I have ended up having a love and hate relationship to this event, as it also is associated with one of the only achievements that took me days to complete, the one to kill your own doppelganger. Now, the reason for this love-hate relationship is that for every meta event, which starts up roughly every hour and a half, only a single player would be randomly selected to be eligible for this achievement, since only the legendary doppelganger counted. I even twice experienced an AFK player at the waypoint being selected by the doppelganger. So yeah, I am not bitter at all. That said though, the event is quite a cool experience, and the achievement that I am complaining about is even a hidden one, so as not to infuriate too many players by leading them on, I presume. The desert area in the Ellyn Riverlands is probably one of the coolest desert environments we've seen in the game to date. The once grand oceanic area, now covered in constant sandstorms, is littered with enormous leviathan skeletons, giving us a glimpse at the deep sea horrors that once lived on the planet Tyria. The people living here are nomads and defectors from the regime of the Vabian kingdom, all with their own stories to tell if you seek them out. At the far south of the Riverlands, beyond the riverbanks, stands the giant bone wall separating the Elonian desert from the territory of King Palawajoko. The Desolation is a vast wasteland covered in sulfuric fumes and acid, and guarded by the awakened forces of Palawajoko and the Morden Crescent, making the environment troublesome to traverse. This place is dark and gritty, and I love the atmosphere of death and destruction getting such a large spotlight in the expansion and in the game in general. As such, here we find Joko's Bone Palace, crafted from the bones and corpses of the greatly diverse, ancient, long-extinct races of the Giganticus lupicus. We also find the very place where the ancient human god, Abaddon, was struck down by his fellow gods in ancient times, the Mouth of Torment, with its dormant portal to the realm of torment in the center, now overtaken wholly by Balthazar's Forge forces. This particular place is also the place where the meta event chain takes place in the Desolation, a 3-split assault on Balthazar's army, the Forged, in the Mouth of Torment to break down their pylons. If successful, a giant legendary Forged Demolisher will spawn to combat the Surga players. Apart from these gritty areas, we also find the floating Temple of the Jinn, placed in the Desolation to harness the power of the tormented sands to create the jackals. In the Desolation, we generally face off against a lot of Palawajoko's forces, the Awakened, and amongst those, we find my absolute favorite creature design, possibly of the entire game of Guild Wars 2, the Awakened Abominations. Their design instantaneously reminded me of my all-time favorite movie monster, the Xenomorphs from the Alien franchise, just with a bit of gold-plated Egyptian-inspired decorations sprinkled on top and a whole weapon rack of swords stuck into its back, one of which the Abomination will actually pull out to swing at players for one of its attacks, only to stick it back into its back afterwards. These creatures are badass to fight against and can be really troublesome at times. Another great and mysterious creature design throughout the ranks of the Awakened are the Awakened Canets, which seemingly are directly inspired by statues of the Egyptian god of death, Anubis. When I first saw these, I had no real idea what kind of creatures they actually were or had been before they died, since they already had a lot of Char-like stature and movement. I figured they might just be Char with a golden jackal mask on them, or perhaps a very tiny version of the Giganticus lupicus that we see in the core dungeon of Ara. Funnily enough, I wasn't the only one wondering about that, and during the developer AMA, Matthew Medina actually answered the question of what exactly they are by stating that they are a combination of different flesh and bones brought together by the powerful necromancer that is Palawajoko. So yeah, that's one less theory gone wild. The final map, the Domain of Abbey, is yet another mix of clearly diverse scenery. Here we find Vabian culture and architecture, but we also find the dangerous brand created by the Elder Dragon Kralkatorrik, where floating purple crystals cloud the sky, and in the area you will be struck by lightning from the fury of the brand, unless you're undercover or if you're floating or flying. Luckily, we have that option at least, to be able to enter and traverse the brand. Unlike the super hazardous area of the Bitterfrost Frontier map from the previous Living Story and its Bitter Cold Zone, which forces you to craft a potion daily to even enter. The brand still feels dangerous to enter into in many respects, despite safety being tied to a mount mastery, and also the menacing look and feel of the environment to me really shows a great example of edgy beauty. In the brand, at the Mirror of Bliss, we find one of the two meta event chains of the map. This one asks you to hunt down the branded Forgotten Zealots and stop them from charging up a crystal to blow everyone up. If you succeed at stopping them, two legendary creatures, a branded Forgotten and a branded Hydra, will spawn and will have to be stopped before the time runs out. The second meta event chain in the Domain of Abbey involves the two Hounds of Balthasar, Timur and Tegan, now in a forged version. The Domain of Abbey is generally littered with an intense map-wide diversity of both environments and creatures. It has a touch of everything from the different cultures and enemies that we've seen in all the other maps. The biggest atmospheric difference, however, lies solely in the NPCs and their dialogues, both ambient but also the dialogues with players. See, this is because story-wise, the Vabian territory is under strict rule of the Lich King Palawajoko, who suppresses his subjects and feeds them lies about his power and accomplishments. In the Domain of Abbey, you will find that the people there act as though Palawajoko is a god. And this change of vocal atmosphere lets players understand the Lich King from a whole other perspective and adds a whole lot of depth to the character even before we've really had any first-hand experiences with him. This, to me, is probably one of the strongest aspects of the entire map, as this allows players to grasp the story of this new region of the world from different perspectives. It allows us to potentially not just view Palawajoko as a purely bad guy, and this may be very important, as I believe it is very likely we'll be seeing much more of the character as the 4th season of the Living World kicks off in a matter of days. My overall impression of the desert maps for Path of Fire has been extremely positive. I personally truly feel that I have enjoyed both the visual aspect of the maps as well as their inherent event structure. Sure, they're different, but they have their own charm. And for that, I have nothing but positive thoughts about the map designs. And for the reasons that I have highlighted in this video, I can truly say that I am extremely happy with the maps that we got with Path of Fire. Sure, they're not perfect, and some of the events and rewards structure definitely need some touching up, but I am definitely sure that we will be seeing a lot more fine-tunings coming to the maps with the introduction of the Living World Season 4. And on that note, I believe that the topic for this video has concluded. In the next video, I will be talking about guilds and the guild hall, so be sure to come back for that. But for now, thank you all for watching. Until next time, I will see you in the mists.